Holy shit, it's out? Is it out? What's the link? It's fake? It's not real? It is real? Well, that's just confusing. Let me pull it up, boys. Hang on. Wait. Oh! Alright guys, it's that time again. Let me know in the comments down below if you agreed. I would highly recommend hit the subscribe button. And this is a big one. And smash that like button. And I'll see you guys next time. There better be fucking cards in this. I better see some effects. This better not just be like, look at my champions. Optimism was right. Dude, optimism wins. Optimism never wins. What the hell? Oh shit. Oh, is that the Big Dipper? Oh, it's a fucking Sigma or something. Is this supposed to mean something? Okay, I'm getting really underwhelmed. I used to... Oh, it's like astronomy class all over again. I took that class. Biggest waste of time in my entire fucking life. Okay, we're 53 seconds through. So where's your optimism now, bitches? Wait, what does that say? It doesn't even say anything. Holy shit. I've never been more cucked in my entire life. In my entire life. And Soundboard cheated on me for like 2.5 years. And I've never been more cucked in my entire life. What the fuck? Like, excuse me? What on earth? Constellations represent the cards? Oh, of course. We'll read the stars. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hang on. Hang on. There's a link. There's a link. It's talking about things. We're gonna take it. Shape of Targon, game design. Okay, they're not showing us anything. Almost all kind of like, you know. But let's read this. Let's calm down. Relax. Deep breaths. On this towering mountain, cosmic beings lend their might to mortals. Astral dragons soar beyond the sky, and tribes of the faithful devote themselves to the sun, moon, and stars. Welcome to Targon and the Legends of Runeterra's next expansion, Call of the Mountain. I'm not in love with that name, but you know, that's fine. But Call of the Mountain isn't just an expansion. It's also a set with 2 more expansions to come. 2 more expansions to come. Look at that. What's the difference? When Call of the Mountain drops on August 26th, it kicks off a whole new structure for Legends of Runeterra card releases. We mentioned in What's Next for Runeterra that we'd be doing card releases a little differently after the patch. But now, it's time for specifics. Stay with us for a few paragraphs, and we promise it'll make more sense. Let's start with some quick definitions. An expansion is all the cards, champions, cosmetics, and game modes released with a major patch, roughly every 2 months. Each expansion will have a unique name. This next one is Call of the Mountain. A set is a thematically and mechanically cohesive group of cards released over 1 or more expansions. This set shares its name with the first of these expansions. For example, the cards released in August, October, and December will all be part of the Call of the Mountain set. This will matter down the line when it comes to deck building rules for different formats and modes. Which is, by the way, for those of you guys who don't know, it is very customary for card games. It is customary for card games to do something called rotation, unless they're fucking Yu-Gi-Oh! Rotation is basically the idea of every, like, you know, 1 or 2 years, you can only use sets from the last, like, several sets of the last 2 years. So at the start of a new rotation, a couple of sets or expansions or whatever you want to call them will rotate out, and they'll start rotating back in. Some people don't like them. which is weird, honestly. Rotations are actually really great. Some of the only downsides of rotations are this idea of forcing you to buy new cards, and Runeterra doesn't really have to have that because its cards are very free-to-play friendly. For the most part, rotations are just a great way to keep metas sort of like healthy and not allow you to run like a gorillion cards. It's like TFT sets. Yeah, it's kind of like TFT sets, exactly. So just for those of you guys who might not know, that's what this is referring to. So what that means is, like, you know, when the Call of the Mountain set rotates out, it's going to rotate the expansion as well as all the sets that were attached to the expansion, right? I can talk more about like the design elements of rotation and why it's a good thing. It is not a perfect solution and there are some downsides, but I do really like it, and especially in Runeterra where you don't have to buy the cards. There are usually like wild formats that make it so that like there's formats where you can play with any card. And by the way, even if they're going to do this, which is very likely, it is very likely they're going to do rotations, but this is not going to start for like another year or two at least, right? Okay. Lastly, a new ranked season starts whenever a new expansion is released and shares its name. So in this case, the Call of the Mountain ranked season. Each ranked season has a unique icon for you to earn based on what tier you reach. Okay. 3 expansions that will make up the Call of the Mountain set. Okay, now I'm confused. What's an expansion? Major patch roughly every 2 months. So every set is 6 months, and every expansion is they're equal sizes. How many cards are we actually getting on the 26th? Are they kind of cucking us a little bit? Is that what's happening? Is that why they haven't started reveals yet? Are we not getting that many cards? Scroll down. In this article, talking about 3 expansions. Starting with Call of the Mountain, we'll release new cards roughly every 2 months and maybe a few surprises here and there. Each 3 expansion set will focus on a new region, in this case, Targon. The first expansion in the set will be larger. Okay, that makes sense. 89 collectible cards with 7 champions. So can we compare that to Bilgewater? How many was Bilgewater? How many was Bilgewater? Total. Not the region Bilgewater, the Rising Tides expansion. The full Rising Tides. Was it 120? 120 cards and 11 champs. So this is 89 and 7. Interesting. 89. Whew. I have a few things to say about that. We'll get back to that later. Containing all the cards needed to introduce new regions, themes, and multiple file decks featuring that regions. The second and third expansions will be each about half that size. For Call of the Mountain, I don't know what it is. COTM is just like Cotum. For Call of the Mountain, that's 40 cards and 3 champs, both October and December. These expansions will have a mix of new themes, new mechanics, and evolutions of strategies you encountered in the first expansion. So, like, I think this is really cool. I really like the idea behind this system. I think it's a really smart system long term. I do have a couple of concerns. Going forward, each set will add a new champion to each region, and every expansion will contain new cards for each region. However, in a given expansion, some regions will have more cards than others, including champions. By the time the third expansion is released and the set's complete, all regions will have an equal share of champions and near equal share of other cards. Wow, I like that. I think this is actually kind of genius. God, I'll talk about that a bit more too. I have a few things to say about these. Even when we aren't adding new champs to your favorite region, each expansion will offer cards to support classic strategies or introduce new twists on old favorites. So this is just a visual kind of like saying everything we've seen already. I don't think there's new information in this visual. That's a lot to digest. Well, it's all a bit abstract right now, but it'll become more clear as cards release. That said, you're probably asking, why switch to this? Rising Tides in the new wave. Since the start of LOR, we've been looking for ways to maximize experimentation and support strategic variety. We've had some ideas that worked well, and others that needed some tinkering. I thought it would be something funny to comment on. I thought I'd be able to click on this and see like a grizzled ranger or something like that, but that's fine. But one thing we haven't yet talked about in depth was how we thought future card releases could impact this goal. We knew we wanted an expansion right at launch. It meant a bunch of new champs and cards for those playing since beta, while new players could come in at a moment where everyone was discovering new content together. That expansion becoming Rising Tides, which introduced Bilgewater and 120 new cards. Rising Tides was an effective way to kick off launch, but that didn't mean we needed to do future expansions the same way, and in fact, many devs have been talking about another method for some time. I think this is great. I really really love the fact that they're not like set on their approach. I want you guys to know that. Also, this isn't a dick suck. You know, I do like you know, the Legends of Runeterra team overall, which is, you know, why I'm playing this instead of other card games, but I disagree with some of their decisions, and I'm pretty open about it when that happens. For the most part, I'm liking everything I'm reading so far. We spent a lot of effort trying to keep LOR's metagames fresh for as long as possible, to stay in that sweet spot where there's an array of decks and nothing feels solved. This leads to design decisions like establishing a tighter range for card power level, building strategies around champs so they'll at least have a home and at least one dex, and investing in a live design team that actively works to maintain the environment. Another decision the design team has considered since very early in the game's development was, you guessed it, more overall card releases. One of the simplest and exciting ways to shake up the meta is to add more cards more frequently, but that comes with a cascade of additional decisions and trade-offs. Call of the Mountain was our first opportunity to explore how a set could fit into different expansions and how new structure might work for future sets. I think this is genius. I think this is really, really good model. I think yeah, it's great. The core idea was to create more frequent points of strategy, discovery, and meta disruption instead of one big launch party that slowly fizzled out. Yes. Here the one downside though is like it is really important to realize that there's trade-offs both ways, right? Like, we can very easily see the downsides of a format where like every 4 months they do a big expansion. This is a model that both Hearthstone and Magic have done, and the downsides of that are very clear. It's like the last month in every expansion is usually kind of interesting because it's like reveal season, and the month before that is absolutely terrible and like nobody has any interest in playing at all. And even the reveal season is more about, you know, the community aspects than actually playing the game. The shape of Targon. Like in any card game, we start designing LOR sets way in advance. That's because the design is just the first step in a long process where you playtest, balance, and iterate on the design. Playtest, illustrate, record voice lines, and add in a few more cards. Playtest, polish, playtest, and bug swash. Not to mention prepping a little marketing pizzazz as well. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. We've already started developing the Targon region, and it's set before we even announced the existence of Legends of Runeterra. Once we locked in about 3 expansions approach, we introduced new questions in the design process, which themes and mechanics interact with each other, which champions and followers should go in each expansion, and how would you batch all the cards to support the entire set. Yeah, and this is really important. I think a lot of people are kind of like not aware that this is how game development works, but like at any modern game that gets developed, like by the time it launches from any, I mean, okay, sometimes there's like an indie game that blows up, but any like modern like AAA company, I don't even know like where the cutoff line on AAA is, but any modern game dev studio will have like expansions planned out, right, mapped out. This is particularly important in LOR because you need to have every region needs to be planned out roughly, not necessarily each card designed, but every region needs to be planned out in how it interacts with other regions for them to even make sense, right? You can't just like release the game and then be like, okay, what do we want to do for an 8th region? Ooh, let's do like a bunch of stuns and this interacts in this way. It doesn't work like that. You need to have it all mapped out and then you add them like pre-planned as it goes, right? Okay. By the time Call of the Mountains were ready, so is the plan, which begins tomorrow with the first card reveals. Okay, so it is confirmed that the first card reveals are tomorrow. If you're here for the hope of there being some reveal, get out. Okay, as all the design decisions that went into making the first Call of the Mountain expansion could be an article on their own. So that's what we're gonna do. We'll be back after Call of the Mountain with releases with set lead Sean Main to break down the themes you'll see in the expansion, how they create a foundation for the set as a whole. You know what? I'm actually looking forward to this. You know, I'm really big on like game design and set design, and usually, you know, set leads are really good people to talk to, because you know, making the set is like a thing. Expansion is totally make your first experience with Targon all the more awesome as you discover the beginning of new archetypes and potential for revamp classics ones. The only ones you get more excited about supporting rules and evolving strategies that reveals and expansions to follow. We'll call them out as the template for 3 expansion sets. Future sets will continue to build on that template and possibly shake things up further. This is partially because we have more time and opportunity to really make them shine in this new structure, but also because every region will require more and more cards on expansions to ensure all regions have an equal amount of cards in the set. Once again, we'll be looking at you, the community, to see how this plays out and see how we can be improving. Thanks for playing as always, building better card games together. Okay, great. Mill and tempo control. He now plays Ionia Noxus Stunlock, and his attitude shows no signs of improving. It's like every Ionia Noxus player I know. Okay, so there's actually a lot I have to break down about this. There's actually a few really important sort of like subtextual things happening here, and there's probably like I think 4 main points I think there's four main points that we have to cover here that are actually really, really important, that are sort of only subtly touched on. Okay, so first of all, let me finish the thought I kind of started before and didn't really explain properly. We do all know that the downsides of this model were they release every 4 months and things fizzle out, right? And that's kind of awkward, right? When we have this Hearthstone or Magic model, the sort of default status quo model, the downside is after a certain amount of time, it's super dead. Like there's at least an entire month every patch. There's at least 1 month. In a bad patch, sometimes it's like 2.5 months where the game is just super uninteresting, super stagnant, and nothing's really happening.
1/8 gay.
A couple of bullet points here. In Runeterra, because they do monthly balance patches, this might be less of an issue. But one really big thing is, like, we have to understand that the more they partition, so, you know, there's X new cards every year, right? Your job as a designer is to figure out how to, like, print them in release cycles. So do you do, like, 1 big expansion annually? Do you do 2 expansions and split your, let's say you're printing 1,000 cards a year, right? Do you do 2 and do, like, every 6 months you do 500 cards, so on and so forth, right? And if you slice it up too much, right? If you do it, and some card games have done this, where some card games have tried doing, they don't even do expansions. Some card games have tried doing, every month I'm going to release a few cards, right? Instead of doing, like, quarterly expansions. And I can tell you, there's a good chance you guys haven't heard of games that do this. Do you know why you haven't heard of games that do this? So, I mean, obviously some of you guys know, but know of games that don't even try to do expansions, but it's because it often doesn't work. So there is a concern in splitting things too much, because yes, even though expansions do cause a huge month where there's zero hype, what expansions do is they create a shit ton of hype. And that is important. Now, I don't love Hearthstone, and I know you don't love Hearthstone, probably because you're here. Listen, I'm not saying, like, Hearthstone's a good game, but I have to I do like certain things about Hearthstone. I think people are just very anti-Hearthstone. Hearthstone does some things right. And one thing Hearthstone does right is it does actually do pretty good expansions. Now, you might disagree with a lot of the fundamental design or the card design or Blizzard's policy on certain things. That's fine. I don't disagree with you on that. It's not a perfect game, but their expansions are really hype. Like, the way they do big expansions that are often, there's often a lot of cards in the expansion that are just, like, crazy and, like, absolutely, like, game, like, just, like, the text on the card is like, oh my god, like, hard to even imagine, right? And that is, it does a really good job of bringing people back in every, like, quarter, right? And I mean, it needs to, because sure, it's Hearthstone. But my point is, like, keep that in mind. This, like, big expansion hype is important, and it is a downside that, yes, splitting the cake a little bit more does take away from the hype a bit, right? Now, the question is, where does the balance lie? Because, as always, design is about balance. I think I will really have to play around with it for, like, several expansions to see for sure, but I like the sound of what I'm reading here. I think that they're setting out to strike a good balance. I like that every 6 months we'll have, like, step 1 of an expansion with 89 cards. I think that will be pretty good. It's obviously, so keep in mind, Bilgewater was 120 cards with 11 champions. So if we're scaling, it's 75% the size of Bilgewater, right? Or not the region, the expansion, Rising Tides, I should say. 75% the size of Rising Tides, right? Keep that in mind. So I think that's fine. I think that's a good number, right? And I like the fact that they're doing, like, the second and third expansions later, right? I think it's cool that they have these sort of, like, nested categories with these themes and mechanics and strategies. I like, there will be, like, this is a really, really cool, like, nested system. The fact that there's, like, each expansion is 6 months, And that works really well with the idea of rotations, because it's going to be very clear cut where rotations end and where rotations start, because 6 months divides into a year very well. I like that it is, you know, going to be okay, so when we look at the first set, when we have like 2 weeks from now, we're looking at all the new cards, there will be so many archetypes or champions or whatever that we will feel are really close to being played, and we will actually have a lot of hope that those missing pieces of the puzzle will come down in the following month. That's really fucking cool, because normally in card games, sometimes you feel like there's a missing piece of the puzzle, and you're just kind of like, yeah, maybe in 3 years that'll come down and this will make sense. This will give you a feeling that anything that feels like it's very close to making sense archetypally or like synergy wise or whatever actually might just be waiting for one piece. And something like, by the way, something like one puzzle piece, if they add something like that here in, say, for example, expansion 2 in the set or expansion 3 in the set, that can do a good job at shaking up the meta in a big way with a small card addition, right? A small card injection, which is insanely important. Insanely important, by the way, because that's the downside of this. That's the downside of this. Look at this. When they add like these 40 card set 2 or expansion 2 and expansion 3, the one risk, these are small 40 cards. The one risk is they might not shake things up enough. But if they add a couple of like kind of these puzzle pieces that were missing from before, you can do a lot in 40 cards. You can do a lot in 40 cards for mixing things up. So I love that. And yes, there's going to be balance patches on top of that. I will say, as a game community, we shouldn't really feel like we have an idea the size or scope of long-term balance patches moving forward. Riot's still figuring out their system, in particular their live design system. It is very possible that the balance patches will change their rate of frequency or like change the actual like scale or scope on which they try to balance things. Because of course this new expansion set system is going to affect how often or aggressively they even want to balance. So just keep that in mind. Like, it is very true that the fact that we have balance patches in this game will make this sort of thing better, but it's extremely possible for them to want to slow down or scale down the balance patches after this is starting to happen. Like, that might happen, which I wouldn't even necessarily be opposed to, right? This is so much better for free-to-play overall. It would be so hard to keep up as free-to-play player if they did a new expansion, they did it right. I fucking love this. I think this is genius. I think this is really, really great. I think that Legends of Runeterra is a game where it's like almost all of their decisions are really, really smart. I think that when it comes to, I think that on the couple of things I would disagree with Legends of Runeterra about, the design team, would be stuff in terms of individual card balancing or like mostly like metagame design, which is metagame design is really, 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 really fucking hard. Like, there's so much complexity that goes into that. It's hard to actually like it sucks as a designer because you make a lot of like interesting stuff, and even if you balance it very well, it's very easy for like one or two things to go overlooked and ruin the entire metagame, right? Don't get me wrong, metagame design is really hard, but I'm not saying that they don't make mistakes there. That's probably the one department, like, in their decision making that I don't love. When it comes to like how they do monetization, how they do peripheral modes, how they do like the fundamentals of the game, how like the rules of the game are set up, I fucking love everything about this game. Like these guys actually really do get it. They really do. No dick suck. And I want you guys to know that I'm not just simping for. I know some people have the impression like whenever you, it's kind of hard to be. Whenever you're positive as a content creator, people are like, oh, this guy's always too positive. And whenever you're negative, you're like, oh, this guy's always too negative, right? It's like, I'm trying to be as balanced as I can. I'm trying to like be fair And there are plenty of, you guys have, if you've watched me for a while, you know that there's plenty of things that they've done that I disagree with. There were at least 2 balance patches that I think were kind of horrible. And, like, kind of couldn't have really done anything. I think that almost everything I see from this dev team is genius. Like seriously. This is really great. I think. But again, it's really hard to say for sure without actually playing on this for a long term, you know? It's really hard to play on this. Okay. Another thing I'll mention is that they are, and I love this. This is so underrated. This is so underrated. They are, on the expansions, they're not trying to keep all the regions equal. It is so hard to explain how important this is. This is so fucking important that they're doing this. This is so important that they're doing this. Okay? So, basically, we have this idea of, okay, there's a few ways to break this down. Like I said, the biggest problem with this model is that sometimes it won't mix up the meta enough, right? And if you don't print cards aggressively, then that's going to be happening. And what I will say, by the way, is, and this is so important to understand, that this system, by the way, where they're adding 89 cards or 40 cards, so on average, what does that make the average? It's 170 by 3, so the average would be like 53. Wait, that's not how math works. I say 50. Whatever. 65. It's whatever. It's basically 60. On average, we're looking at, you know, these 56. Yeah, it's 56. Let's say 60 for the sake of clarification. 60 card expansions. And we have to be aware these might be power crapped, right? I mentioned this when they did Rising Tides. Do you guys remember when they started doing the Rising Tides reveal? And I was saying that they are power creeping this game, and I think that's a good thing. And I talked a lot about power creep because power creep has a very negative connotation, and it can be bad, and it often is bad, but it doesn't have to be. There's a lot of reasons to do power creep in a good way. But we were looking at the reveals, and everything was power crept. We saw Grizzled Ranger, which was, of course, unfair. We saw cards like Fury of the North, cards like Sejuani, cards like Vi. Like, there was a notable power creep to the game. And the thing is that to some degree, it's inevitable. And power creep has a lot of, like, so people do this thing where, for some reason, they say a very interesting claim. People say power creep is so that devs can sell more cards, or something like that, which is like kind of true, but extremely disingenuous. Like, it is like the development studio and the customers or the consumers of the product are in a symbiotic relationship. They both want people to be experiencing new content, and people pay for that content. That's the trade-off. It's the same thing. If you're making like a game, it doesn't matter if the game is paid or free to play. If you're making new content, a new set, you want people to play the new strategies more than the old strategies, because that is more interesting and keeps your game alive more. It brings people back into your game if they haven't played in a while. Like, this all applies to games that aren't looking to sell new things, right? Which, keep in mind, Runeterra is obviously doing, but maybe to less of a direct degree than other card games that are, you know, making more money off of direct purchases. The thing to understand is, like, yes, power creep is basically a way of making sure that new content is represented, right? Because if you release new content on the same exact power level as everything else, then first of all, it'll be, you know, a little lukewarm to people after a while, and people might lose their hype a little early. And second of all, a really important thing is like as a developer, you don't have entire accuracy over the balance of things, right? So if you aim for an average card, sometimes it'll be above average, but sometimes it'll even be below average. And when that happens, when you release a new thing and it ends up below average overall, that's terrible. Like you can't have that. There's no hype there, right? So yes, a little bit of power creep is necessary, and it needs to be done in a controlled, contained way, and it needs to be done in a way that doesn't trivialize too many old strategies, and it needs to be done in a way that is long-term sustainable, which is where rotations come in, because when you have rotations, you can have like this sort of like, you know, somewhat almost infinite treadmill of like power creep and then like big downward spikes when the rotations actually rotate out, right? Okay, so what you have to understand is that because they are slicing the pie up further, because they are reducing, you know, Rising Tides was 120 cards, and these are going to be 60 on average, it is important to keep in mind that we should expect to see that level of like power creep, which I don't think is a bad thing, but like the smaller they divide the pie, sort of like the more they might gain out of like a bit of power creep. I don't think this is a bad thing, again, and obviously, you know, okay, if the power creep was applied to the new region and we saw Targon decks everywhere, that would be a bad thing. Yes, and there's some games that have done that where like they make a new character and that character's OP and you see it everywhere. That's bad, right? What I'm talking about in Rising Tides is like they give every region good new tools, right? Which means we still have diversity, but it does mean that we see less old tools. That is overall positive. It kind of necessary, overall positive. I'm not advocating they make Targon better than the other regions. I'm just saying overall, these 90 cards, regardless of region, to be able to spawn diversity and like, you know, new content should be good, right? You would rather overshoot than undershoot, if that makes sense, okay? So, anyway, where this comes back to not trying to make every amount of regions the same, is like when you do this, you open yourself up to a lot of different things. So first of all, you can do so much more with the amount of cards you're adding. Like, God, it's so hard to explain. I know I said it twice already. It's so hard to explain how flawed of a system it would be if it didn't have this one line. This is such an incredibly important line. Because like, I mean, if you imagine when the game has 10 regions, when they are releasing these 40 cards and they're doing like 4 cards per region, it's going to be really ineffective. It's going to be like this idea of like trying to make everything too balanced all at once. And like these 4, like it's, if they want to be effective, they have to be power creeped. But then when you like power creep over a really small amount of cards, it's just really horrible. So yeah, this just ends up being completely necessary. And one thing I will say is there's a few different perspectives on balance. And a lot of you guys, I think, like are familiar with this concept, because this is something that game dev community or game communities talk about a lot, which is this idea of, okay, what do we like our balance to be? Because some games do balance by trying to keep everything completely equal. Some games do balance by trying to keep most things equal, but like harder strategies are a little bit like better. Some games do balance by having things like take turns being good. That's a very common one. And everyone, it's a game of degrees. Everyone does that to different degrees, right? There's some companies that are known for doing this, that will balance by taking turns, right? It's like, oh, this character slash region slash deck slash strategy hasn't been good in a while. Let's make it nuts. Let's make it tier 1, right? Or this thing's been tier 1 for a while. Let's make it tier 4, right? This is a really important mentality. Almost everyone does that. Yeah, exactly. So again, it's a game of degrees. Certain companies do it a lot and certain companies do it a bit, but everyone does it at least a bit. It is a sort of like necessary way of thinking about balance, right? It's just how much you go out of your way to do it, right? And I like that approach. It's an important perspective to have, and this gives them like a good framework into that, right? It's like not every, like, especially when you have 10 different regions to balance. 10 different regions to balance. And when you've got 10 different regions, and when your game is built around, like, region combinatorics, and you have every single combination of 2 different regions representing a allegedly distinct playstyle archetype, which some of them are going to miss the mark, but even if only most of them hit, and most of them are hitting, it's impossible to balance. How many is that? 10. It's 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, right? Is the amount of combinations when there's 10? 45? Yeah. So at that point in time, 10 choose 2. It's not 10 factorial, because factorial is multiplication. Yeah, it's 55. Yeah. At that point in time, there will be not only 10 regions with distinct playstyles, but in theory, the way the game is set up to be designed is that there will be, theoretically, almost 55 different archetypes. 55 including mono. Yeah. So what that means is, like, and don't get me wrong, they're not going to make 55 archetypes. They're going to be short of that. It's probably going to be closer to 40. There's going to be some region combinations that will just not really be able to make coherent sense. Like, for example, there's a few of those already. Like, most region combinations in the current game have a distinct play pattern. Some of them are more than the sum of their parts, and some of them are just simply the sum of their parts. Like, when I look at Demacia plus Freljord, there's not really a distinct play pattern there. They are the sum of their parts. It's a mid-range concept, and there is some connections, but there's not, like, a unique archetype when you combine those two, right? And there's not always going to be. So Demacia Noxus is also nothing. Yeah, Demacia Noxus is also kind of, like, feels like it's almost trying to be something, but yes, I would also say Demacia Noxus is also kind of a missed one. Yes, I agree with that. And so basically, you have built into the game these 55 different unique play patterns. Let's say they acknowledge that 15 of them are whiffing. So let's say they built 40. How are you balancing 40 different things all at once? That's so impossible, right? It's not even close to possible. I mean, Hearthstone can't balance like 9 heroes, and that's not even a jab at Hearthstone does. Like, it's just impossible for games to have that level of, like, balance or diversity of strategy. Like, it's never going to be even close to feasible. So this idea of acknowledging that and just being like, okay, you know, regions kind of take turns being strong, and making sure that these expansions are able to get done what they need to get done with a small card pool is so insanely important. Right? Like, it's gonna be really hype. Okay, so now I think I was gonna mention, I think there might have been one more thing I wanted to mention, but this is kind of like my overall thought. This is like when I was going through this like 30 minutes ago, and I was saying like, ooh, you know, I have something to say about that. Let me see. I think there might have been one more thing that I forgot. Major patch roughly every 2 months. See how that's for a few paragraph. Quit sets. So yeah, the question is, like, are these sets going to be big enough? Did they slice the pie too thin, right? Because you don't want to slice the pie too thin. There is a point where it will be too thin. I think that bi-monthly is good. I think that alternating monthly balance patches with monthly mini expansion launches sounds like a really good system to me. It can be hard to say in a vacuum, but that in theory, and a lot of you guys are agreeing, I can see, like, that sounds perfect. Like, basically, I can't really imagine something better than that, but maybe I'm just not good enough at imagining things. Okay. So ranked season is every 2 months, makes sense. It just kind of aligns perfectly. It's a very clean system. It's very intuitive. Like, everything fits together. Like, the three sets nest together. There's one big and 2 minis. It nests into a year, and the years will nest into the eventual rotations. And every 2 months aligns with the season start, and every other month is going to be the balance patch. Presumably, we don't know if they might change that or something like that. Starting with Call of the Mountain, release roughly over 2 months, maybe surprises here and there. 3 expansion set will focus on a new region. It makes sense. So larger, looking for collectible, and introduce new themes, multiple wild decks. Third expansions will be about half that size. Mix of new themes, new mechanics, and evolutions of strategies. God, that's so great. I love the idea of like. I love this idea of just like, sort of being teased and being blue balls and just being edged by Runeterra devs. I love this idea of them just like. You know, it's like an extended reveal season. Like, we're gonna get some card, like, that's gonna get revealed in, like, 2 days. And we're gonna be like, oh my god, this card is gonna be so good, but it just needs this other card. Oh, please, oh, daddy, Runeterra, do it. And then, it's not gonna launch, you know, it's not gonna be there, you know, on launch. People are gonna try it, and it's gonna suck, and then people are gonna be like, oh, but I'm so close, Riot, I'm so close. Just, yeah, in the next reveal, in the next set, 2 months from now, do it! And then they won't. But then there's still gonna be the third one. It's still gonna be like, oh god, yes, the final. And there's gonna be Reddit posts about like, oh, the faithful have been rewarded. You know, the Snapvine. Like, imagine if fucking, you know, Snapvine gets revealed tomorrow, and there will be like this literal cult on Reddit. There will be this literal like. Just like the second coming of Snapvine, and they're gonna be like, oh my god, just wait until expansion 3. Just wait until expansion 3. It's gonna be, the perfect combo piece is gonna hit. And like, I know I'm kind of doing a bit right now, but like, I'm very serious. Like, this actually is a lot of fun. Like, that is a really fucking fun system. Seriously. Like, it is like extended expansion. It's almost like extended reveal season, almost. And like, reveal season is so fun. Like, and we're gonna get so cucked and so blue balls, and there's gonna be so many times where our faith is not gonna get rewarded. In fact, that's gonna happen almost always. But it's gonna be really fun having optimism, and then before we get disappointed, because like, I mean, at the end of the day, that's all life is. It's about temporary optimism before the disappointment comes, right? And the Runeterra devs, they get this. They fucking understand me. That's so good. Like, I can't be the only one who feels this way. That this idea of just like being teased nonstop for 6 months in cycles. It's like, oh god, I'm into it.